learning the teachings of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. Here's a picture of him. This is the Rebbe's father-in-law. He's actually buried right next to the Rebbe in the Ohel in Queens, New York. And this is the leader of world Jewry during the Holocaust. He taught these discourses in 1942, 1943, these profound discourses of wisdom that were shorter in nature because I think, this is my own interpretation, I think people were having a harder time focusing because people's hearts were broken. But at the same time, these teachings contain within them pearls of wisdom that carry the power to be able to transform the tide of war. As the previous Rebbe said at that time, you wake up in the morning and your first impulse is to check the news, to read the news. Don't do that. Realize that this is a spiritual war. Everything that happens on this earth is a result of what goes on up above. And therefore, instead of reading the news, make the news. Create the news. Because if you're able to win the spiritual war within yourself, that's when you're going to be able to transform the tide of war, to vanquish our enemies in the physical theater of war as well. And that's why this discourse that we're learning is called Reishis, Goyim, Amalek, Dovid. Amalek is the first amongst nations in its hatred of the Jews, and in the end, he shall be destroyed. This verse comes from the prophecies of Bilam, page 380 in the book. This verse comes from the prophecy of Bilam, who was hired to curse the Jews in the days of Moses, but his evil intent was transformed by God into the most beautiful, prolific blessings. So when he speaks about the end of days, he tells the Jewish people, as immortalized in the Torah, that all anti-Semites are going to turn. All anti-Semites are going to become pro-Semites. Can you imagine? Did you hear the speech by the 10 U.S. senators yesterday in Israel, in Tel Aviv? 10 U.S. senators, five Democrats and 5 Republicans. They said, we are 10% of the U.S. Senate. And we have come to Israel to say that we love Israel and we don't hate the Palestinians, but we hate Hamas. And we are going to destroy Hamas. We're going to do whatever it takes to destroy ISIS. We stand with Israel and the goodness and the freedom and everything. This was the most incredible speech. I was first time in two and a half weeks, I think I was able to relax a little bit. God forbid, not putting my trust in men, but putting my trust in Hashem, who is empowering us through the power of the United States as tremendous friends of the people of Israel. And we're so grateful to the bipartisan stand of Democrats and Republicans together, standing in favor and in support and in unequivocal support. They said, if any one of those hostages gets slaughtered, we hold Iran responsible. And we will take this war not to a 2-front theater, but to a 3-front theater. We're going to Tehran. And that's exactly the words that he said. It was amazing. It was beautiful. Why am I talking about that? I don't remember. I got totally distracted.
Today's Wall Street Journal says that the Hamas went to Iran to train.
Yes. I saw that too.
Revolutionary.
Yeah, you've got to be an ostrich.
But they're not involved.
Of course, they're not involved. You got to be an ostrich, bury your head in the sand, right? By the way, the head of Hamas also said that they didn't kill any civilians.
Right.
Didn't kill any civilians, right? And actually, the U.S. president said yesterday, very interesting, that he doesn't believe for 1 second the Hamas official numbers of casualties. Like what? You're talking to the terrorists. How do you know there wasn't 65,000? Israel, it took them 2 weeks to figure out how many casualties we had, right? The moment that hospital was blown up, there was 500. When it was a hospital, there was 500 casualties. Minutes later, became 900 casualties. Minutes. They counted in minutes. But then, when it wasn't an Israeli rocket anymore, it wasn't a hospital. There were no casualties.
Just a few cars.
Right, exactly. So you got to realize who you're talking to. It's ISIS, and that's the bottom line. There's no sense of trust over here. But it's almost easy for us as mortals to say, wow. So this powerful world leader or world power stands with us. We'll be okay. That's the mistake that the Jewish people made in the Purim story. Remember, the Gemara asks, why is it that the Jewish people were worthy of annihilation, God forbid, in the days of Haman, in the days of Mordechai and Esther and Purim? And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai answers in the Gemara, he says, because they went to the feast of Achashverosh. What's wrong with going to the feast of Achashverosh? What's the big deal? Achashverosh had a big party, invited the Jews. The food is kosher. What's the problem? The problem was, I've explained this elsewhere, that the reason he was celebrating a feast is because he was celebrating the non-fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah. Jeremiah had said during the destruction of the temple by Babylon that in 70 years, Hashem will remember the Jewish people, the temple will be rebuilt. According to their miscalculation, the Gentiles calculated that the 70 years had come and gone. and that the prophecy was not going to be fulfilled. Hence, they were celebrating the death of the Jewish God. And Jewish people went to this party. Are you out of your mind? Right? You went to this party. Why did they go to the party? Because they said we had friends in high places. The king is inviting us. The world emperor is inviting us. His name is Achashverosh. He's inviting us. He's giving us kosher food. We feel secure in his friendship. You turn your back on God, God turns his back on you. The message here is that as much as we're grateful to world leaders like the President of the United States and the Senate of the United States and whichever countries are standing with us and don't stand with us, you cannot put your trust in man. Do not trust in generous ones, in a human being that has no salvation. Where do we put our trust? Yisrael b'tach b'Hashem, the Jewish people, we trust in the Master of the universe. So, what the previous Rebbe is telling us in this discourse is remember that
Can I just add
of course.
So in last week's Haftarah, the Ashkenazim had a Niyasayah. There's a pasuk in there which is a fascinating pasuk which speaks to our time.
Is that from Isaiah?
It's
Isaiah, right?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So it says, we said in the summertime, any weapons which they have created against you will not be successful. And then there's a language, any language, any words that they say will fall short of their goal, any negative language. So this whole, we're fighting two fronts. There's a physical fight, but then there's a propaganda fight.
Oh, the propaganda war.
And all the Lashon Tashi'it, the language will not be successful.
120, right?
Right.
It's beautiful.
No,
That's a different one. That's 20. But this is very interesting. So what you're saying is that there's a two-front war already. There's the physical war, and then there's the propaganda war. Right? We've never done very well in the propaganda war. Who was it that said?
But this time it's starting to crack.
It's starting to crack. The atrocities were so bad, right? Of course, for Turkey, these are not. This wasn't bad at all, right? They're not terrorists, and even half the world's media is still calling them militants.
One of our congresswomen are saying that
Mujahideen, whatever that means. That means warriors. But what's interesting is that somebody once said, a famous person once said, that the definition of democracy is not when two wolves and a sheep have a vote on what to have for dinner, right? That's welcome to the United Nations, right? Anyways, but let's go back to the core of the issue. The core of the issue here is that the war here is turned not by senators, not by Instagram, social media, TikTok, Meta, whatever, Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin. The tide of war is turned by the Master of the universe. Leiv Melachim biyad Hashem. The hearts of kings is in the hands of Hashem, right? What turns the heart of Hashem? Just like in the Purim story. Let's go back. In the Purim story, the Jewish people, we turned our backs on God. So God turned his back on us. He's like, oh, you got friends in high places? Go for it. Let's see what happens, right? 9 years later, they get this decree of annihilation from Haman. It was only when Esther calls his fast of 3 days and 3 nights, the 72-hour fast, which was a return to Hashem. It was then everything turned around. Same thing with us as well. When we have the courage to take responsibility for this war. Maybe this is what the United Nations Secretary General meant. No, that's gonna be a gross. No, scratch that. That is enough. Let's not even say that. That would be a very, very strong benefit of that. God forbid. No, he's evil. He didn't mean it. I hope he didn't mean it, because he should be absolutely disqualified from his position. In any event, but still, I mean, seriously, rockets on civilians on Israel. Rockets have been fired on Israeli civilians for 18 years already, and we haven't heard any world condemnation. But now we're hearing, oh, there's rockets in it. Do you know what? There's rockets falling in Gaza, but there's rockets coming from Gaza onto Gaza, and there's rockets from Gaza onto Israel. But you're only condemning one-way rockets. Why is that? You started this war. Don't make it our fault. Anyways, I'm sorry, I'm getting off track. Where I'm going with this is that the Frierdiker Rebbe is telling us that we have to take responsibility for this war, to realize that as human beings, we are the fulcrum of existence. The fulcrum is that part of the engine which moves everything. It's that one part which is the connector between heaven and earth. That's the human being. We are the selective creation. We're not just another inhabitant of this beautiful planet, but as a human being, it says King Solomon, the entire world was placed into our hearts. We are the microcosm which manifests in the macrocosm. This is the wisdom of King Solomon. And the teaching here is that what goes on in your heart is what manifests in the world around. You're worried about the war. Don't treat the symptom. Go back to the cause. And that's what we're learning right now. We've discussed this in the past couple of days. We said that there's an anti-Semite within yourself. What's the anti-Semite within yourself? We said that there was two souls within you. You have a godly soul and a natural soul, an animal soul. The godly soul is God-oriented. It's purpose-driven. The animal soul is instinctive. It's animalistic. It's self-serving. Now, there's a constant tension within us always. We've learned this in Tanya, but we can approach it from a different direction from anti-Semitism. There's a tension within us every single time that you have to make a decision. You have to grapple between these two souls. Should I get out of bed this morning to study Torah, or should I sleep a little longer? Should I give more charity than I'm comfortable with, or should I spend it on myself? Should I buy the kosher food, or should I not buy the kosher food, right? Should I stand up and say something to protest the wrong or not? Should I curb my desire to share some juicy slander about someone else, or do I zip it, right? There's a constant tension within us. Now, if you succumb, you're manifesting the anti-Semite, the animal soul. If you prevail, then you're vanquishing the anti-Semite. This is where we're going with this one.
But most people do things instinctively.
Oh.
People don't say, okay, let me discuss the pros and cons. In the daily life, you just not.
I would agree with you, Chuck.
Around.
Chuck, I would agree with you. I'm going to add one word to your observation.
More instinctive and studied.
I'm going to add one word.
I do that.
I'm going to add one word to your sweeping overgeneralization.
It is too generally.
Yeah. I'm going to say one word. You said most people are instinctive. I'm going to say most unconscious people are instinctive.
Most unconscious.
Yeah, most unconscious people are instinctive. In other words, most people that are not aware of the fact that there's a war raging within you at all times. Most people that are unaware that you have two souls within yourself, not one. Most people that are unaware of the profound implications of their actions are instinctive. I would agree.
Well, then I would say most people are unconscious.
Correct. Okay.
Probably 99.9%
Well, no. It used to be 99.9. I think that the world is racing towards high consciousness. I really do. This is Mashiach.
Purposeful, the concept of being purposeful, which is a secular concept.
Think about this. This is amazing. An amazing idea. How many people are into purpose now? Conscious eating. Being present. Right? Talking about your phones. There's apps on your phone called, I think it's called Present. I think something like that. And then there's conscious parenting, conscious marriaging. There's something called non-violent
Communication.
And
so you think everybody
there's like a whole therapy about this.
Trying to be more conscious.
Yeah, I think it's called nonviolent communication. It's like a whole name to it. What?
So this is evidence of a movement towards being more conscious.
Absolutely. I think
100
years ago, until like World War II, it was like survival of the fittest. Whoever you could kill, good for you, But now it's like, what do you mean? What are you doing? There's people understand purpose. They understand that there's a higher reason. And in fact, what's very, very interesting is that when it comes to therapy, in these therapy classes, they tell people that 50% or more of you, more than 50% of you, will break your romantic relationships as a result of this course. Because what happens is that when people become conscious of their inner struggles and traumas and anxieties and inner workings, and it soon dawns upon them that they're living with an unconscious person, the other part. And you can't make them conscious. You got a consciousness is going to come from within. So what happens is that a lot of these relationships don't last because you're living with a person that is instinctive, as Chuck describes, and you're trying to be mindful and thoughtful and insightful and introspective. It's very difficult to get along. So, but I do think that the world is racing towards that. But how about it starts right here, around this table?
Are you saying that a mindful person cannot live with someone who's not? I don't agree with that.
I'm not saying that.
I think if you widen your horizons, you're able to live with someone that's very different than you. The whole idea is to live with someone that's different than you and still be able to form some kind of a connection. I think that's an admirable approach. I just think that practically it's not that easy. Not that easy.
To live with someone that is, think about, we have a parent that is, two parents. One is violent and instinctive to the kids, God forbid. And the other one is conscious. It's like, what are you doing?
Okay, but take something else. One is happy and one is melancholy too. They can still live with each other. The whole idea is to broaden our horizons, to be able to live with people that are different than us. Everyone is really different than us. Can we live with people? How some people can live with this difference and that difference. And
I think it depends on
therapy,
how conscious you become.
I think when secular perspective of therapy, which is very, is it exactly you? No, it's never going to be exactly you at the end of the day. And I think that too flippant with that separation.
What are you saying about secular therapy, though?
So I think that they would suggest that if that other person is different, has a different personality than you, don't live with them. And I think that they're too.
Oh, secular therapy is very quick to amputate. I do think so. Yeah, absolutely. But Torah teaches us the opposite. Torah teaches us, listen, this is your bashert. You're living with your problem is your assignment, right? As opposed to your problem is what you need a nuke and just move on, right? Because you're going to take that same problem with you, right? So Torah teaches us your problem is your assignment. Hashem doesn't make mistakes. Exactly. So figure it out and make it work. Illuminate the darkness. I was talking to our guest here, who was this past Shabbos, Skull in residence. He was a former neo-Nazi. And he said to me, and he discovered that he's a Jew later on, he says to me, like, why did I have to suffer so much? Why was I put into such a dysfunctional family? And I said to him, God doesn't make mistakes. And if you were placed into such a dark, hopeless childhood, it's because you are on assignment to shine a light where it ain't shone before. All right? So let's do this. Let's keep on going. So what we're learning about here is we have two souls. These two souls, one is instinctive and one is mindful. The godly soul is mindful. It's dictated by intellect. The animal soul is emotive. It's dictated by how I feel, right? And our goal is a two-step process. Number one, you have to identify the enemy. You have to know who you're fighting. That's part of the problem with modern war in Israel today. Where when the Russians taught the Arabs about the living shield doctrine. The living shield doctrine is the doctrine of using people to defend your weapons, using civilians to defend your weapons, as opposed to traditional warfare, which was to use weapons to defend people. Right? It's called the living shield, and that's what the Arabs do. The problem with guerrilla warfare is you don't know who the enemy is. Right. And Hamas right now is actually shooting their own civilians, forcing them not to evacuate because they're trying to maximize casualties. They're actually trying to maximize casualties. There's a voice recording of a conversation between an IDF and a civilian in Gaza who says, we're trying to get out, but we can't because Hamas is shooting us. They're forcing us to stay in our homes so that we can get killed, right? So the problem right now is you don't know who the enemy is. So right now, when we identify the enemy within ourselves, we will be aiding the war effort. The IDF will be able to identify the enemy to know exactly who they need to be killing, right? Then the step two is to be able to take action to vanquish the enemy. But first, let's identify the enemy. And that's what we're going to do right now in the next little few minutes, okay? So we're on page 380 in the book Hasidic Discourses. Winston, if you're here with us, if you could post the link, please, to the YouTube listeners. Okay, we said like this. We said that we have two souls. Each soul is made up of 3 intellectual attributes and 7 emotional attributes. The 3 intellectual attributes are Chachma, Bina, Das, Chabad, an acronym for Chabad, which is the 3 steps of intellectual assimilation of any idea. If you're going to process any intellectual idea, whether it's accounting, business, whether it's military strategy or divine wisdom, you're going to have to go through 3 steps: idea, understanding, and feeling. That's it. Idea is the Chachma, is the burst. Understanding is Bina, is comprehension, and then you got to translate the idea, the understanding of the mind into the feeling of the heart. That's called Das, which is realization. It happens through meditation. Those are the 3 steps of intellect. Then you have 7 emotions: kindness, strictness, compassion, triumph, humility, connection, and communication. Those are the 7 attributes of emotions. The godly soul, at the bottom of 380, the godly soul is godly intellect. And the Yetzer Tov, which is the good inclination, is the emotional formation which comes as the result of comprehending godly matters. The emotions of the godly soul service the intellect of the godly soul, because who's primary? Intellect is primary. As a human being is vertical, where the heart is below the brain, this heart, the emotions serve the brain. But an animal, where the heart and the brain are on the same level, it's horizontal. The brain and the heart are pretty much the same thing. In fact, the brain is sometimes lower than the heart because it's near the ground. Right? Because it's eating all the time. So the animal soul on the other side is mainly emotive, a heart that desires. Whatever the eyes see, it desires. It does so in an animalistic manner, never having enough. If you're driven by emotions, can you ever be satisfied? It seems, according to what the previous Rebbe is describing here, is that when you're driven by your emotions, you never have enough. If you're driven by your intellect, you can't have enough. What do you mean? I have enough. I have an uncle in Jerusalem. He's a carpenter, like his father. My grandfather was a carpenter. It's the street, a very simple life. There's a street of carpenters, and that's what they do. So one day I'm there, and I see it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I see he's closing up his store. I said, Uncle, the day is still young. What are you closing your store for? He says, what do you mean? I earned enough money to eat today. I'm going home. I'm going to go study Torah. I said, wow, that's amazing. It's amazing. Here in America, you're like, no, I'm going to make more money, right? Because you're driven by emotion, right? But when you're driven by intellect, what do you mean? Why am I working? I'm working what? To support my family. Why am I supporting my family? So we can live as Jewish people. Okay. So I have enough money for today to live as a Jew. I'm going to go home and study and live as a Jew, right? Why? Because money comes from where? My brain knows money comes from Hashem. Money doesn't come from, from just randomness. Money comes from Hashem. So I'm going to go serve Hashem. My brain understands this idea. This is the godly soul. This is how he thinks. The animal soul says there's no intellect. There's no intellect. There's no brain. It's just pleasure, indulgence, right? So I want to have as much as I possibly can. There are hedonists who are so devoted to their lustful desires that even when they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that their desires are actually self-destructive, they're unable to contain them. This is because their intellect does not affect their emotions. I wonder if the addict would fall into this category. You're thinking about the addict?
Exactly what you said.
I wonder if the addict falls into this category because you think he's talking about the addict? The addict is like,
he's saying once it's self-destructive.
See, my question about addiction is if addiction is a disease. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm not sure if it's a disease which is beyond your control or it's something you can't control. Look, there's obviously different shades.
Right.
It's what
we believe that Hashem doesn't give us anything you can't control.
Right. So the way I understand it is that the addict, there's different shades of addiction. So, for example, when somebody somebody's addicted to their cell phone, you're ruining your relationships.
Isn't it what it says? Hashem liben b'shusim.
Shoim.
Whatever. It's not. They can't control.
Shoim ein liba b'shusim. They have no control over their.
But you become so. Isn't that what it is?
I guess that's what it is. Yeah. What are you saying?
Aren't there emotions where never having too much is good?
What do you mean?
I mean, well, not all emotions are bad emotions.
Look, I think
love is love.
No, I think the idea here is. Is that it's non-intellectual. So, for example, getting into a toxic relationship, right? People get into these relationships that are bad for you, but it feels so good. I feel so good, but I know it's bad for me. So if you're driven by intellect, you're not going to do it. But if you're driven by emotion, you are going to do it, right? You see what I'm saying? This happens all the time. But think about just something as simple as a cell phone addiction. It's prevalent, and it's a pandemic. It's a modern day pandemic. It's ruining your relationship with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, with your friends, But why do you do it? Because you just can't control yourself. Because it feels good, because that dopamine hit every time I see a text message or a like or a share or a YouTube view or something, you get that dopamine hit and you're like those little, lab rats that are just getting their little dopamine hits, and you just keep on doing it because you're just so instinctive. You're driven by instinct. You're living like an animal. A human being is an intellectual creature whose mind dominates over his heart. And we spoke about in the last lesson. The brain rules over the heart. This is one of the foundational doctrines of being a Chabadnik. What is Chabad? Think about that. Chabad is not just a denomination of Judaism. Yeah, I affiliate with Chabad. No, Chabad is not a denomination of Judaism. Chabad is an approach of living. It's a way of living life dominated by intellect. Is that everything that I do is cerebral. Everything that I do, I think it through. Is this good for me? Is it bad for me? And I make an intellectual decision. I'm governed by my intellect, right? To be Chabad means to be able to know who you are and to be able to make that choice to identify and affiliate with my godly soul that's driven by intellect.
At least to strive towards that.
Right, to strive towards it. Because you're going to fall. You're going to fall. We're all human. On the contrary, the intellect of the animal soul does have intellect. Page 381. The intellect of the animal soul serves only as a vehicle to the fulfillment of the person's desires. He uses his intellect only to serve the emotions. The emotions are the bosses, right? It's interesting. You have these executive suites. You know what executive suites are? Where you can make the impression that you have a big office when you really have nothing. It's basically a building that is run by a group of secretaries. And the secretaries are the bosses, right? And each company comes in and they answer the phone and they make it look like you're the boss.
Yeah.
But really, the boss is the secretary, right? So it's kind of backward. It's a backward situation. Normally the secretary is to serve the needs of the company, but here it's actually the other way around. It's a very interesting dynamic that you have over there. Like is the horse pulling the cart or the cart pulling the horse, right? So this is two modes of operation. You can operate as a CEO in charge of the secretary, or you can operate as a secretary in charge of the boss. And there's two ways to do that. You got to take your pick, because at every decision you make in the day, you're going to have to figure out which one it is it's going to be. So it does so. How does the emotion boss around the intellect? It does so by whispering of the delight and the pleasure to be obtained in fulfilling one's desires. It also sharpens the perception of physical matters in order to heighten the desire to indulge in them. It causes a person to lust after wealth, for example, and come up with all sorts of ingenious rationalizations for evil conduct towards others. We say by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It says she seized a tree that it was so pleasant to look at. And in the Shema we say, you better watch your eyes, because it starts with the eye first sees, then the heart lusts, and then the hands take action, right? So you got to watch your eyes. That's what it says in the Shema Yisrael, in the third paragraph. You should be, first the eye sees, and when the eye sees, it's already even now propaganda's at play, right? It looks good, right? Let me give you a very practical example. You got a very delicious dessert in front of you, a delicious dessert. It's full of stuff that's going to kill you. It's got all that sugar, toxins, cancer-inducing stuff, right? How many people, Chuck, would eat that dessert? That looks amazing. How many people would eat it? How many people would not eat it? Give me a percentage. Overgeneralization is okay.
75%.
Okay, I think you're being very kind. But I would say 95% of people would eat that dessert because it just looks so good, even though they know that it's bad for them,
I
right?
wouldn't eat it.
Okay, so you're good at part of the
It's
5%.
the
See, you're
best
becoming
chocolate
conscious.
chip
Look at you. You're not
cookie
instinctive, right? What?
I'm saying it's the best chocolate chip cookie you've ever seen in your life, and it's right in front of you.
It's smelling good and looking
Yeah,
good,
exactly.
right? And it's just this one last cookie before I start my diet again, right? Right? Because that's an emotional decision. That's not intellectual. So that's a decision that says, this actually is not going to kill me. Here the emotion bosses around the intellect that says, even though it's destructive, he rationalizes, gives an order, explain to me how this is actually good for me. Well, I'm going to be full. I'm going to feel better. Actually, this might be
Emotional.
You're going to figure out. It's emotional intelligence. You're going to figure out a way. Wow.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem to me to be black and white. I can think of things that I would make a decision on emotion, even though my intellect would tell me I shouldn't do that.
Okay, so
right. Yeah. But I don't think it's intellect is always the right way to make all decisions. I think sometimes emotion, depending upon the emotion,
look, as long as the intellect,
the right thing to do,
as long as the intellect has an objective, opportunity to weigh in, I think it's okay to decide to go with a gut instinct or to go with an emotional, sway. But as long as the intellect is not jaded, but when it's subjective to the predisposition of the emotion, then it's not true intellect. Do you follow what I'm saying? Look, obviously, it's going to be a lot of gray areas. It's going to be a lot of exceptions here. Let's just finish this paragraph here. Thus, the intellect of the animal soul not only provides the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, with sustenance by finding various means through which it is able to obtain its desires, but the intellect of the animal soul also protects it from the attacks of conscience by justifying all of its underhanded actions. To give a very dramatic example was the Nazis. The Nazis were murderers. They were bloodthirsty murderers. What do? They said, well, Jews are subhuman, right? So Jews don't deserve to live. They're like cockroaches. So Same way you kill a cockroach, you don't feel bad about it. That's why it's okay to kill Jews. So here you had the intellect, which was servicing the emotions in a way that's making you not feel bad about it, right? And when, this head of Hamas was saying the other day that we didn't kill any civilians, I don't think he thought he was lying, because in his warped mentality, right, his mind has already led him, as a bloodthirsty barbarian that he is. His brain has taught him that men, women, and children are all militants. They're all soldiers. So to him, he doesn't see anyone as no civilians. What do you mean? There's no civilians. Civilians are innocent people. Jews, every Jew is guilty, right? So I don't think in his own head he's even thinking that he's lying, right? And that now you get into the propaganda of the world, right? How is it that the SJP, Students of Justice in Palestine, those guys that stand against Israel, and then how do you in your right mind stand up and protest in favor of Hamas? So you're okay with this happening to babies, then, right? Is that what you're saying? They're not thinking about that part. Maybe the Jews that are doing this are saying, well, the Gentiles are going to like us more, so this is a good idea because the anti-Semites are going to think we're better people when we march with them. This is all warped, jaded thinking that is the result of intellect, of emotion alone. In summary, so we're going to summarize the whole first paragraph of this discourse. Amalek is the foremost of all anti-Semitic nations, and in the end shall be destroyed. Just like all anti-Semites are going to be turned. But Amalek, we said, is going to be destroyed. We're going to explain why then, when Mashiach comes, will all the sinful nations be purified, but Amalek will be obliterated, right? That's the question we have. So we explain, God provided man with a godly and an animal soul. The godly soul contains the good inclination. The animal soul provides the evil, and the animal soul has the evil inclination, right? Now, what we're going to explain is the reason why Amalek has to be destroyed is because the godly soul will ultimately prevail over all parts of the animal soul. This is what we're going to say in the end. Spoiler alert. The godly soul will ultimately will influence the animal soul to do good. But there's one part of the animal soul that will never be turned. And that's the chutzpah of the animal soul. The chutzpah, the audacity that says, I couldn't care less. The audacity, that part of the animal soul that says, I don't care what facts you throw at me, I won't be ever inspired. This is the anti-Semite that says, doesn't matter what happened. This is my narrative. That's Amalek. Amalek within and Amalek without. That's the Amalek that has to be destroyed. That's what we're going to say in the end. Quick comment here from Daniel the trucker. I was an addict for 6 years in stimulants due to the post-PTSD from war. And I can only speak for myself, but my evil inclination would always justify my use to make it okay or understandable. Very, very tricky indeed. Thank God I'm 9 years clean. Good for you, Daniel. But the evil inclination will use your intellectual. Once you know you can control your inclination and immediate impulse and want again. This is just what I went through, though everyone is different. So look, I want to validate your struggle, man. You went through war and you went to stimulants and you got addicted and you were justifying it. Wow. But now you've had the courage to go 9 years clean. That's amazing, Daniel. The fact that you go 9 years clean means that you've been able to vanquish your anti-Semite in the most beautiful way. Go with intellect. Emotions are fleeting. Yes, indeed. Emotions are fleeting. Intellect is truth. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up over here. Have a lovely day. May we win this war. Vanquish your anti-Semite, guys. Do it as soon as possible. It starts over here. If you can vanquish your anti-Semite today, we will turn the tide of war. Okay, we're going to win this war. Let's do it. Have a good day. Chuck, you want to lay the phone?